Day.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so welcome to the Dr. Elizabeth Webb Professional Learning Series. We are in March, our third month of the year, and as you can see, I'm back crazy. It's all good. So I am Karen Terrell, the second vice president of Georgia TESOL. Our co-moderator tonight is Dr. Elizabeth Webb herself, and then we have other board members here like Brian Hibbs, Dr. Brian Hibbs. Uh, I can't see any others. And our speaker tonight is actually a board member as well. So um, you'll see all of us around. So I want to just highlight a couple of things and we're going to turn it over to Laura Grace. So our theme this year is disciplinary language and literacy. Um, uh, uh, in order to creating communities of practice. Um, and we are basically having 2 talks a month. So this month was special because there's a lot of conferences happening. So the 2 talks this month are on Tuesday nights, but typically we're on Thursday nights, kind of every other month. And these are free professional learning series or sessions for anyone who is connected to the area of the TESOL profession. So you can invite your administrators, your district leaders, your school-based TESOL professionals, anyone who is TESOL related can come to these meetings, or anyone who's just interested in TESOL. And so we do have a couple of special events, one that's coming up in May, which is going to be our end of year in the school year social. And so you'll be hearing more about that soon, where different board members will meet up with you in different locations across the state to say hi and talk to you about whatever your concerns are, and of course about Georgia TESOL. Going back a moment, so our professional learning series this year is divided up into 4 groups. So there's teaching and learning, administration, adult education, and community engagement, and then also higher ed. Tonight's session falls under the teaching and learning session, and anytime you see our flyers, you can look in that lower right-hand corner and it'll tell you which one it falls in. You of course are welcome to all. There's no limitation as to what you can attend, but that just so you know what area we've put that session under, you can take note of the bottom right-hand corner. And then after this meeting, you'll get an email actually from me that will ask you for your feedback and what sessions you'd like to see in the future. And if you are a Georgia TESOL member, you can also get a certificate of participation so that you can count that towards your annual credentials. Or if you just want to have it to say that you were attended, that's fine as well. So without further ado, we are going to turn this over to Dr. Laura Grace, and I'm going to let her introduce herself because I don't see her bio right now. So, Laura Grace, you can introduce yourself, and I'll return you to the thing.
Okay. Well,
There we go.
are you all able to see my screen? I just want to make sure before I get started.
Yes,
Yeah,
I can.
perfect. Well, thank you all for attending this after school in the evening. I appreciate your time. My name is Laura Grace Ferris, and I'm serving on the board this year as a member at large. I focus on advocacy efforts for the board and helping students in different ways, but my primary focus is on legislation that affects undocumented students and helping them attend college. I serve in Forsyth County Public Schools right now. I teach in a high school setting. I'm at Forsyth Central High School. For the previous 15 years, I was in Fulton County at different high schools in Alpharetta and Roswell. And I've always taught ESOL, but different areas. So when I first began working in ESOL at the high school level, I was pushing in because I didn't have the certification to work in every subject area. So in Georgia, you have to have certification to be highly qualified to work in ESOL to teach students on your own without the content teacher. So when I first began sheltered content, that was after I had gotten certification. So when I first started in high school, I was pushing in. So pushing in was great. It helped the students because they, it was difficult for them. They didn't know when the test was, or even like the directions of what the class was doing at the time. And it was difficult for them to advocate. So I do feel like there is value in pushing in. But sheltered instruction is truly where you can kind of go at your pace and direct the activities in the classroom. It takes a while to get certified in all the areas, but I highly suggest it if you have the time or desire. What I did was I went ahead and got certified in each individual social studies area because I felt that the kids really struggled with the literacy component, and also social studies is like a heavily, it's driven by a lot of lecture. I'll just say it like that. A lot of oral language. So that's where I felt like the kids also, they didn't have a lot of background knowledge in US history, American government, even economics is definitely guided by like a US economic system curriculum. And then world history just has a lot of reading and writing, and the content is presented in an oral way. So that's really where I felt like the kids needed a lot of support. With the math, they could get by, science, even there's a lot of math in that. Literature, we usually have ESOL. We have to be certified in K through 12 lit. So, or excuse me, 6 through 12 lit to teach ESOL in high school. So we already have that covered. So I just felt like there was a gap with social studies. So I will be focusing on high school sheltered courses. Tiffany, do you have a question? You're welcome to come off the mic and just ask.
Yeah, I was just curious about I'm a relatively new ESOL teacher and I'm already certified in ESOL, German, and Bio. I was just wondering how important it is or how common it is that ESOL teachers are certified in so many areas like you just mentioned for yourself.
It takes a while, but most teachers are just certified in literature, which is great. But we end up pushing into the other content areas, like all the sciences, all the maths, and the social studies courses. And then even health is a difficult course for them because there's a lot of science. But it is helpful to get those certifications. Most ESOL teachers are just coming in with the ESOL certification or endorsement, and then literature for grades 6 through 12. So that's covered. It's good. I highly suggest that we try and do more certifications to help the students in those various areas. But I'll be honest, it took me a while to do it. And it was helpful for me to push in first so that I myself could learn the content, because I hadn't had a biology class since I was 14 years old. So I'm sure most people are like that, just taking algebra and geometry. Like my schedule was going from physical science to a health classroom, back to like a world history. I truly felt like a teenager. But the push-in does help support the ESOL students in these courses because they just don't even know like where to start, and they don't advocate for themselves in those courses. So really it's just us being there and directing them, what to do when and how to do the project or the note taking or whatever. In a sheltered course, you can truly drive the content and kind of go at your pace. You're still meeting like with a PLC or, whatever professional learning community that you all have or grade level. you're still working at their pace, but you can go a little off track and you can focus more on the language and those sheltered courses. So like I said, it took me, a couple of years to get certified in a bunch of different areas, but it really is so much easier because that way you're the teacher in the classroom instead of almost like team teaching or even assisting in a push-in. But that's a good question. I'm gonna go ahead. So with sheltered instruction, and please feel free to come off the mic or chat. This is a very informal session. Sheltered instruction is just where the ESOL teacher is the sole instructor. So they're teaching the language and the content, and they're certified in that area. I'll be honest, pushing in was the best way for me to learn the content because I was going through the entire curriculum with a teacher, just listening to them, taking notes, doing the activities with the students. I could have just taken the GACE and studied, gotten one of those yellow books and just studied and taken the test. I had tried to do that in the past. I think it was so much easier just to do the course with the kids at least 1 year as a push-in teacher, just supporting the kids in the content area and then getting the certification. With social studies and math now, it's not a gen certification field anymore. You're taking like biology, the physics, chemistry, world history, US history. You're taking all of those individual GACE exams. They don't have like a gen social studies 6 through 12 like they used to. Same thing with science. And then math is a little bit different. They'll do just like an algebra 1, algebra 2, and then they've got a geometry. I might be mistaken on that math one, but for the math, for the science and the social studies, each of those content areas, you're taking a GACE in. Yeah, anybody, please feel free to ask a question anytime. So that is the alternative to the push-in. Push-ins are great. You don't have a lot of prep, but you don't have a lot of control of the pace of the class or the activities or the way that things are delivered. That can be different though. You can be team teaching that class. You really are just working it out with the teacher and however they want you to serve in that role, however you want to support the students in that role. I have a class right now, a government course, and I've got 15 ESOL students and he has like 7 or 8. So really I could teach that whole class and then his kids would almost be like the extra. So it's just however you want to work it out with the teacher with the push-ins. But with sheltered, you're really driving the curriculum, the pace. You're doing the same standards. You can do the same assessments as them, but I do a lot more performance assessments in sheltered. So the kids are doing presentations because I quite honestly feel like I can't gauge if they understand the content with a multiple choice test. I just see them bubbling. So BC, BB, I don't know if that means that they understand what we're talking about. So I do have them do more presentation or performance-based assessments. I have them do an essay for every standard. I let them use their notes that they're taking in class, so that gives them an incentive to actually take notes in class. And then that way it's strengthening their writing skills, which are always difficult with academic literacy. I think we do a ton of writing in the literature courses, which is great, but we really need to like focus on the informative essays, argumentative essays, especially in social studies, developing arguments with evidence. And also with the science courses, because they really need that support, like preparing a lab report, things like that. In math, the word problems, they always have difficulty just explaining the steps that they did. And I found that in math, it's hard for them to even say, subtract 3 from both sides or divide this by 3. So that's just what I've found in my practice. Do I need to stop for questions? Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so that's just what I've found. I feel like I'm good with doing multiple choice all day long, but I just feel like I can't gauge if they are with me unless they're speaking. And I think a lot of times in high school classes specifically, the kids are just not talking like the other kids are. But like our kids are quiet or they're talking with each other, but they're not really participating in classroom discussions. And I feel like if we can get them out of their shell a little bit, of course, they do not like talking in front of the class, but that's okay if we have them doing it every week. And I think that once they just get used to speaking in front of a group, and I let them, I'll have them, do 5 images to talk about this one standard. So say we're doing like Industrial Revolution, they've got some pictures up, and then I'll ask them to explain like labor unions or something like that. And of course, they always say, they can't remember, but I'll let them like ask a friend, and then the friend will answer. The friend has the notes, that's fine. So everybody's participating, and everybody's talking, and it really does build their confidence and gets them to use academic language. And I think a lot of times in ESOL, we focus on the social language when we do speaking tasks. But other than, read alouds and literature, or even just reading an essay aloud, but I think if we get them to argue with evidence in these social studies courses, or even the math courses, demonstrate, I moved X to the other side, I divided, the 3/4 times X, just using that language, that academic language verbally is really going to help strengthen their written academic language. So the word salad with ESOL, I feel like our acronyms change literally every 3 years. I mean, I can barely keep up with it. I started teaching ESL in like the late 90s, and then it became ESOL, or ESOL was in K-12, and that was English as a second language. ESL was with our adult literacy programs. And then it has changed over time, English for speakers of other languages. In academic, and honestly in like the US DOE language, they're using multilingual learner, or MLs. Still in Georgia, we're using ELs or ESOL, but that slowly kind of changes and is evolving into multilingual learners. So EL is just an English learner. My colleagues know, the history of maybe some of these acronyms that have come in, but it really doesn't matter when it came in because it'll change in a couple of years. But LTEL is our long-term English learners, and these are students that have kind of been enrolled in the program for an extended period of time. And generally, they probably have some study skills issues, or even they might be diagnosed with disabilities later, or, the students that you have. I'm thinking of a couple that, just are never really test out of the program. And that doesn't really mean that they have a disability. An emergent bilinguals, thank you. It just means that, they just need more time. I have a son who, needs more time. And I think that if he was in a different country learning a different language, he would probably be an LTEL in whatever the target language was. So it doesn't necessarily signify a disability. It's just that they are extended in the program. Did I miss any questions? I just want to make sure I'm not going too fast. Yeah, exactly.
Well, just comments. You're fine. Keep going.
Yeah, okay. Please interrupt me anytime. I'm just gonna keep on going, but feel free to interject. SLIFE is another kind of newer acronym. This is students with limited or interrupted formal education. I think in the past we've just said students have gaps in schooling. Yeah, thank you. Another one. So this will happen like when a student is going back and forth between their home country and the US. They might be going back to work, or I have students that, I'll say, where you been for 6 weeks? And it's like, well, I was working. I'm helping pay the rent. So it doesn't have to be going back to the home country back and forth. It could just be like having gaps in schooling temporarily, like I said, for a couple weeks, or it could even be for years. So a lot of times, we'll have a student come in that hasn't been enrolled for a couple years. So they're still in the grade. They have to graduate by their graduation year. But we understand that they have these gaps in schooling, and so they're going to need more academic support. So we'll classify them. These acronyms are flags that we have in our county, and you probably have them in your county as well, just to kind of bring attention to what kind of student you're working with. If you're seeing a student who's in the 10th grade and has really low literacy skills, but they've got the SLIFE flag, then it shows, okay, well, they've been going back and forth. They might not have been enrolled when they were in their native country, or they might have taken time off to work in between some of these academic years. MV is the McKinney-Vento Act, and this protects unhoused students. So sometimes students are living in a hotel, or even if they're sleeping on a friend's couch, or maybe they're at their aunt's house even, we would classify them with this MV designation, just to draw attention to the fact that they are not without their primary domestic residence. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are out on the streets. This just means that they are unhoused. They just don't have a permanent address at the time. So they might be in an extended stay. They might be in a hotel. They might be with family members that are not the guardian. UY is unaccompanied youth. So these are students that are without a guardian. So I have like a few students that live together. They're seniors, but they are here in the country unaccompanied. So maybe the parent has returned to the home country, or maybe they're no longer with the guardian, but they are on their own. And this just shows us, when we're looking at grades or even to call home, that they are the guardian. They are responsible for themselves. They don't have support financially or of a family member. They're on their own in the country. Do I need to answer any chat? I don't want to go too fast. Okay, so I'm sure that you all know what the WIDA language functions and sample language features are. I don't know. I won't make that assumption. I'm sure everybody knows what WIDA is. These are just our national standards for K-12 ESOL as far as their language functions. WIDA has kind of focused more lately in these past few years on academic language building. So they are looking at 4 domains to inform, explain, argue. I'm forgetting the other one. And then they're going through literature, science, math, and social studies in each of these domains. And the document is super big and long. It's on the website. I have linked it here. But I went in, I have another professional development with the school on Friday, and my colleagues and I just went in and took some of the sample language features, things that we want teachers to target, like literally in like a 5-minute opener, or even just writing a phrase on the board so that the kids can get started. Because the kids will be able to write in their language about the topic, but their language is still very elementary. And if we would look at it, it would look like maybe a fifth grader wrote it to us. So we want them to be on par with the other high school or grade level students. So we want them to be using some more elevated grammatical phrases. It's really using, it's not teaching grammar, but it's giving like sentence frames to the content area teacher. Can I exit out of this? Let me see. Yeah. So this is the WIDA document. And this is on the website. I can probably just put it in the chat. And it's great. It's a little long, like 300 pages. So what we did, yes, no problem. So what my colleague and I did, actually, let me go back and just show what it is. So probably you've seen this in your school or, just working in professional development. It's on the WIDA website. I'm just going to focus on like one strand because I work in social studies in high school. I'll just take social studies. The language is a little clunky, but it basically just tells you what the student is expected to do. So like in social studies, we have standards. I need to teach, World War I and the US involvement. That would be like the content standard. And then the language standard would be the WIDA strand. And again, they have like explain, in social studies, it's more explain or inform. So inform, they're just telling what happened. Explain, they're arguing a point. But it does get really specific. And I actually like this and I use this, I teach this way. Like I'll say this week, we're going to focus on using a prepositional phrase. So in your writing, I have them write every day. So like their ticket out the door, I guess you would say, is like 5 sentences about what we talked about. And I'll say, for industrial revolution, you need to talk about these 5 subtopics. And that literally just gives them 5 sentences. They just have to write 5 sentences about that. And then that way, every day they've written a paragraph. At the end of the week, we have a test. It's the essay. It's 5 paragraphs. They get to use their notes that they did in class, which I've corrected. I've just gone around and looked at all of their notes and corrected the grammar. That way I don't have to grade a million essays. And it keeps them focused so that during the class period, they're writing. So I'll talk maybe 20 minutes, we'll do some homework review, and then the other 30, they're writing those 5 sentences. So they have plenty of time. I have plenty of time to correct it. I do it super fast. But then I take one of these WIDA strands and I focus on it. So like this week, you need to use a prepositional phrase at the beginning of your paragraph to designate time and place, and I'll just put like the phrase like this, and I'll say you can change it. I'll give them another slide of like suggestions of other prepositional phrases. They can choose their own, that's fine, but they do need to use it in all 5 paragraphs for that essay test. Then the next week I'll go on to this embedded clauses. This is just like relative clauses. The next week we'll work on synonyms. They always want to say it's great, it's bad, it's good, I like it, stuff like that. So we'll just work on like using more like 3-syllable words. Passive voice is huge in social studies. We're always changing the subject and the object to take focus away from, what the government did, especially. And we switch that all the time with the passive voice. So that's just one other strand that we can use to focus on. I'm sure you can look at that at your leisure, but I did want to kind of show like what my colleagues and I did because that WIDA document is so massive. It's even a lot for, ESOL teachers, and I don't know who has the time to read 200-page PDF, but we went through and just kind of made it a little bit more approachable. So, we showed content area teachers and CTAE, the career and technical courses, just some accommodations that they could use in the classroom, also in testing. We just kind of tried to make it like a little bit more user friendly. But this is kind of what I wanted to focus on, was the language support. So I think CTAE or electives teachers think, oh, well, we don't really, need to focus on a lot of reading and writing strategies, or we're not like a content area, but they really do have a lot of, especially like some of the computer science stuff. I don't even know what they're talking about, but or just any of like, even like the automotive, like I went through with a kid and, did a ton of vocabulary just for all the parts in the car, and like how some of that language would work if he was having to give a presentation. Even if it's not written, he still needs to be able to explain what he did. So we'll say post the terms with an image if they can. Um, some of the abstract concepts, this is like more applicable to social studies. We'll use like political cartoons, or sometimes kids will do memes for projects, and you can find those online.
Hey,
A lot
Laura,
of,
could you just zoom in a little bit, please?
yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And my eyes are so bad too. Um, Sentence frames are great. They're just like using a close, so just I'll take like what maybe the teacher will say, you need to find an article about something in the news this week and then write a summary. And that sounds super basic for a high school student, but for an ESL student who isn't really like accustomed to writing an argument, I think they just need like a little bit of a sentence frame. So I'll just literally like write out what I think the kids should be saying, and then I'll go back in and take out some of just like the basics, like the date, the publication, the title, the author. And then the kid needs to come up with the argument on their own. That's the challenging part for them. And then they need to say whether they agree or disagree and give evidence. So it does get a little bit more, nuanced as they go on. But if we can just get them started with the first sentence, I feel like a lot of times they can take off, and maybe it's not perfect grammar, but they can at least get used to writing in that structure. So with CTAE courses, a lot of times they need to introduce the context with a rhetorical question. Some connectors are helpful for the kids if we just have them posted. Reporting devices when they have to acknowledge their sources. So verbs, they just need like literally what is the word you would use to acknowledge the source. So he claimed that, he reported that, they predicted that. And then framing a topic. Sometimes this is literally out of the WIDA standard. They said things like capture the audience, or supporting a claim. He used allusions, it can just be anything just to get the kids started with the actual frame. With writing, I feel like we focus so much on the introduction, the body, the conclusion, but we really need to give them the actual words. So it's almost like going back to teaching grammar a little bit, except that we're posting what the kids should actually write. So with sentence frames in ELA courses, I'll just take like what I think the kid needs to focus on. The theme is always the hardest part for them. So we'll just say the theme of this, and we can give them a list of themes as well. They can choose one, is seen in the story when the author, and they're just kind of cutting and pasting. So it gets them started so much faster. And I feel like once the kids get started, they can knock it out pretty quick, but it's really just getting them started, because then they could take this, sentence frame and then duplicate it 3 times, or with 3 pieces of evidence, or however you want to structure it. But just putting it like in like one slide in a PowerPoint, having it posted, letting them copy it. You don't even have to do a bunch of copies and everything. They can write it, they can type it, whatever you want. You don't even have to write it, just put it in a PowerPoint, and then that way you just kind of post it on the board and they can get started. I'm not going to read all of these. Did I put this link in the chat? I can't even remember. I think I did. But these are the reader's interests, the noun groups, action verbs, just adverbial clauses, reporting devices again. Sometimes the tone is difficult for the kids. So just putting those like on the board is helpful. With math, I find it's difficult for them to explain what they did. So again, I will literally just look at what the teacher has them doing, and then the other kids are just, knocking it out on their own. So I'll just write what I think that would be a good example. And then I'll go back and just clear out, pieces of data that they could plug in. And then next time, they won't have that support. They need to do it themselves, or they can keep it in their notebook or whatever. They can change the title of the graph, whatever they need to do. With math, there is a surprising large amount of language that we just don't even think about. For one thing, we say the third person plural we, we did this, we did that, or giving directions, you should apply this theorem, you should use this principle. Or even the passive tense, an angle is formed by. Conditionals with if and then, a lot of times when they're working on, what would happen if, as X does this, Y does that. If a population doubles, then it will always, whatever. So there is just a lot of language that it's not just the numbers and the equations, it's the directions when explaining a problem. With science, I find that their lab reports are out of control. Like they don't even know where to start. And a lot of times we don't even do a ton of lab reports in classes, but sometimes they will be a test grade. And I feel like that's where my kids' grades bottom out, is that lab report. So I try to just like pull up like a sample lab report and just say, like, what's the purpose? What was your hypothesis? With an if then conditional statement. And then based on this table, we can see that we were correct, we were incorrect. And I always tell them, you don't have to be correct. It should be like a 50-50. If it's wrong, you're just going to go back and do it again. And then we know that because. So just some basics, and then any kind of vocab with images is really helpful in science. Just some basics in science, causality clauses, cause and effect, hedging, like especially in science, there needs to be a lot of hedging. Like we shouldn't be like black and white on anything. So a lot of the coulds, mights, possibilities, undoubtedly, we could even say if they are sure. Using the passive voice to kind of take away the subject of the researcher and focus on what was being done. And then any kind of like reasoning clauses, like based on the data we saw, whatever. With social studies, they're usually arguing, making an argument. So we'll tell them to start off with the opposition, although this and this were both, or maybe Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were both, give an adjective, whatever. This one was Democratic and this one was Republican, whatever they want to say. So we want them to start with an opposition and then transition into comparing those two. And I think I went through some of this social studies already, but clauses to frame evidence, historians agree, several sources suggest, dependent clauses with who, that, or where. So they'll start with a subject and then kind of expand on that. I'll add the connectors with chronological or causal effects, anything evidence-based. So just really like heightening the language. And again, this was all in that WIDA document, but my colleague and I just kind of made like a handout for the content area teachers to use, just something that they could quickly like cut and paste into a PowerPoint. And we just told them, just before you start any kind of writing assignment, just write the sentence frame that you want the kids to use on the board, or if you want to, do the whole thing in a close activity, you can do that, give it as a handout. So just anything that they can do to kind of support the kids' writing, I think is really helpful because they can do, the kids can write just like some basic language, but it's coming across like they're not as educated as they are. And we know that they are. We know that they're highly educated in their native language, but we need to get that grammar incorporated into that academic language when they're doing their writing in their specific social studies, science, math courses. And here I just have like some basic, this is again like for our training with the content area teachers, but just having them wait 5 seconds when asking a question. And even I tell teachers all the time, because I think we think 5 seconds is 2 seconds. So because it feels awkward when there's silence, I'll just tell teachers, just literally count in your head 5 seconds because they are translating what you said, saying it in their native language, translating it back to English, and then it comes out. So it really does take like a minute, even though it feels awkward. Just letting them, just even counting in your head just to give them space to think. Getting on eye level, I think, just kind of builds trust. I don't know that that's an ESL strategy, but I feel like the kids talk to me more when I'm down on eye level. Like when I'm hovering over their desk, it feels like a power dynamic. And even if they're up in front of the class or I'm in front of the class, it feels like there's distance. But if I'm just down, kneeled next to their desk or, however you want to get on eye level with them, if you guys are both standing up, I feel like the kids just are really more open to, talking when or asking a question or asking what they don't understand when you're on eye level. There's some sort of like power dynamic that changes. It's almost like they see you as an equal. Giving information in small chunks, like just saying information, pausing, then doing a little bit more, pausing, or even just writing information that you think is important just on little post-its like test Friday, whatever. The test dates on their papers. I feel like the kids, it doesn't matter how many times we post it on the board. It's like, it's almost like the board is invisible. I don't even know what's going on, but I'm like, the test is on Tuesday. It's written right there, but they're like, what is that? It's like they don't even see the board. I don't know what's happening, but if we write the test dates on their papers, especially like the L1 students, the ones that have just gotten there or are new to the country or the school, really helps for them just to know like when is the assessment on this. And then just using more formal speech. We use so many phrasal verbs and we do teach the kids those, but it takes forever to learn phrasal verbs because there's just no real great way to teach them, honestly. And there's so many, but using bigger vocabulary is what they've studied in their home country when they've studied English. And it's a lot of times like the book language. So it's almost like they understand that bigger. We would even think of it as like academic vocabulary more. And then teaching strategies with English or literature courses. Using a document camera when you're modeling writing assignments is helpful because then the kids are writing along with you and you don't have your back to the class. So I feel like if I'm sitting at the desk, I can write a lot easier with a document camera and they can follow along with me. The adapted text, any kind of graphic novel is helpful. Having the audio version of the text online, sometimes kids really just do better when they're listening. And some of the kids have really high speaking and listening skills, but their reading and writing is just not there. And then showing the video before reading the text excerpts, not showing the whole video, but just maybe like a 5-minute clip or even a 5-minute synopsis or something like that is helpful before you start to read. Even if you're just reading the graphic novel, just showing a film clip just to remind yourself. And honestly, I read so many books and have so many different courses. It's helpful for me just to even remember, where we were in this book that we just had. So I put together some vocab sheets because it'd be great if the kids all had images with like the key vocabulary. And I just feel like teachers just don't have time to do that. And I understand that, but it has helped me honestly, because I'll go into some of these courses and I don't even know the vocabulary they're talking about. So I started looking up some of these vocab concepts with Google Images. And then I thought, well, if this helps me, it's got to help the kids. So I just put together, I made this math one is like a word wall. Um, and it's just, some basic concepts of this is an algebra 1 course. But even like the formulas or things like that. And I think that this is a good practice for all the students because I get in those math classes and I feel like it's not just our kids. Sometimes our kids are doing great in the math courses. It's like the other kids. I'm helping those kids just as much as I am the ESL kids. So I think just having that like posted is great. Using a document camera is also great in math courses because then you don't have your back to the kids. But social studies, I usually give them a synopsis paragraph before or after the video. Because sometimes these videos, if I'm in a push-in, they'll show like a 45-minute video and the kids just, they really don't know what's going on. But I do feel like the videos in social studies really show like the point of view, like how Americans were responding to what was happening. And that's something that can't really be felt in a textbook. So, they were mad about this or they protested against this. And you can see the people like yelling and shouting. And I think the videos are really helpful for that. Even if they don't understand, they can see like the emotion on people's faces. With essays, just having kind of like a close form or a graphic organizer just to get them started. Making a chart of things, of people, places, and events. I find in social studies, they don't know what's a person, what's a place, what's an event. They're still asking who is the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm like, it's not a who, it's a document. Like that's not a thing. With lectures, sometimes I'll just give them guided note outlines. I'll have the substandards on the left side and then they can fill in on the right side with whatever the teacher is talking about, even if it's just like one little line. And then highlighting the first sentence of each paragraph in long passages and having them like annotate, like actively read. This is like a ACT, SAT test taking strategy when they have to get through like these long passages pretty quickly. So I just have them highlight like the first sentence. A lot of times it is the topic sentence. I know we say it's like all over the place, but a lot of times it is that topic sentence. So even if they just have it highlighted, it's helpful. I made some key terms for the world history and US history. And I just put together, just a list of, I would kind of break it down in each unit, like the people, places, documents, and ideas. Sometimes I would do events if we were doing like a war. And then that way they kind of just could see like, the cultural dress, that kind of gives you a sense of like the time period, what the document looked like. Sometimes it would be like these kind of funny concepts like salutary neglect, which was basically like, the colonists were able to do whatever they want with government. And I found like this kid had done like a meme and it was like, man, do whatever you want. It's like, yeah, that's exactly, it's hard to like put that into words, but a lot of times like just having images like that is helpful. So like this is what I would do for social studies. So I would go in and say what I think is the main idea, and then the kid would write some details down. If the kids were a little bit lower level, I would go in and just write the notes for them, or I would like bold things that, were the most important part. But a lot of times I would, when they got to be higher, I would just leave this blank and just have them fill in the main ideas. But a lot of times I would fill in the main ideas for them just so they got like the basic concepts. With science, I feel like the kids don't know what's happening in the lab. They don't know what a beaker is. They don't know what goggles are. They keep saying Googles. I'm like, no, it's not Googles, it's goggles. But I'll hold up, like the teacher will be telling them, 50 things like super fast. So I'll just hold up the materials they need and kind of point to like where it is in the room so they at least know where to get stuff, and maybe they don't know what a beaker is, but they know it's like that glass thing, and then they can get started a lot faster. Because I feel like in science, it takes me like 20 minutes to get a lab started. Using a lab report template, again, just like with clothes, just leaving some spaces for things is helpful. Demonstrating the lab procedure if possible, like you're going to pour this, you're going to put this in here, you're going to do that, you're going to measure, anything you can just to like physically demonstrate is helpful. And then if they're not being assessed on the measurements, just writing out like how much of each solution or material that they need on the board is helpful, just to, because I feel like those labs can go crazy like in 2 seconds. So it's helpful just to be like, this is what we're doing and this is what it looks like. Go get it, hurry up. And then basic study guides using key terms are great for every course. Posting PowerPoints of the vocab in the room, like a word wall, like we do in elementary school, I think is great. Letting them work in pairs with each other or with other native speakers. A lot of times, I'll come into a push-in class and the teacher will say, all right, I can put all your kids over here, or we can just let them sit wherever. I like to let the kids choose and kind of sit wherever, because a lot of times some of the higher ones, they can integrate really quickly with the other students, and then they're not asking me for so much help, and they're starting to become independent. So I always tell the kids just sit wherever, if it's a push in, even a shelter, because then they will start to integrate with the other students, and they'll just naturally work well together. A lot of times they will do a ton of talking, but I feel like that's a good problem to have with an ESL class. I want them to talk. So even if they're speaking in their native language, at least they're talking about, what we're doing, and they're helping each other. And honestly, that just kind of takes some of the strain off of me when I'm trying to like help 25 kids all at once. With assessment, this is very like much whatever your department wants to do, whatever your school wants to do, whatever your county wants to do. But I always say, try and consider accepting, partial completion. So they might not be doing every single problem or every single paragraph, and that might just be okay to get 100, and then as the kid goes on and they acquire more English, then they need to complete the entire assessment. But it is helpful just to take some of the, especially with the extended time. I don't know when I'm doing extended time because I have another class immediately after this. And then if they come back after school, the transportation and during lunch, like it's such a mess with extended time. But if we consider just taking off some of the problems, like I've seen some social studies tests that are 60 questions long. I just don't feel like that's necessary because my GACE was 60 questions long. So I just don't know that we need to have like these super huge long tests. As long as every standard is assessed, I think we're good to go. Let students complete the in-class assignments as homework. Maybe they didn't complete it in that 45-minute period. Just if they can remember to bring it back, that's the big thing. Reducing test choices, like if you've got A, B, C, or D, maybe just giving them A, B, or C. Sometimes that rubs teachers the wrong way. It's just really whatever is, good for everybody. I would just be open about how I wanted to assess, see what the content area teacher was comfortable with or what the other teachers in the department were comfortable with, and then just going ahead with that. But I have found that that has been super helpful, especially when I have a student that's new to the country. If I just give them 2 choices instead of 4, I can really get that grade up to like a 60 pretty quickly. So, and that's very close to a passing score. So I feel like that's pretty effective. Giving short answer and essay portions of the exam as take-home assignments, as long as they're not using the internet. I tell them I have literally memorized Wikipedia and US history and world history. So if they want to try and use Wikipedia, I can spot it immediately. I don't even need to like check it. So as long as they're not using the internet, I will let them take some of these things home. Like I say, we do the writing in class so I can correct it. That way I don't have to correct like a ton of essays that final day. And then for L1 or L2 students, the ones that are new, Letting them use a study guide with the test is really helpful, because if I don't let that one L1 student use the study guide, I'm going to be spending the whole time with that kid and not the other 14 other kids that just have like 2 or 3 questions on the test. So I feel like that's fair. People have different feelings about that, but I feel like the first couple of tests, the first couple months that they're with me, I'm okay with that, because it just kind of takes the pressure off of me, and it takes the pressure off the kid, and then they can feel like a little bit successful. And I'm going to be honest, they're still not going to pass the test, the study guides. So it's not giving them like a huge leg up. It's just making everybody feel more comfortable. And then, of course, letting them use a word-to-word bilingual dictionary. These are just some of the pre-writing organizers I've created. With social studies, I just kind of, again, do like a close, like here's your thesis, here's your details, compare, contrast, sum it up, and then we're done, and that they can knock out an essay so much faster if I just do something like this. This is my
Grace, can we stop you right
yes,
there?
ma'am.
Only because we only have like 3 minutes left, and there's a couple of questions that are coming up.
Yeah.
But these handouts, that was one question that came up. Someone was asking, can you supply the handouts that you created, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
And we can email those out when we email out the feedback forms and stuff. So so if you send those to me, we can handle that. And then Tiffany just asked, where do the districts draw the line between accommodations and modifications?
I love that question. I feel like let's just all support the kids. And as soon as you feel like the kids' English has risen up, you are the biggest advocate. So whatever you as a professional are comfortable with, it's going to be different for every district. And the language of the law is pretty firm, but it also says accommodate as needed. So you are the professional, and I can tell like a flip of a switch, like when a kid has enough English to not need those accommodations, and I'll just take them off. So I think that you have to be the advocate for the student, but again, it varies by district, by teacher, even if it's written in the language of your district. I think I've noticed that when I work with teachers, they're like, I just want the kids to pass. That's really all we want. And we don't want, it doesn't need to be like a 95, when they're using accommodations, they're not knocking it out of the park. They're just getting to a 70. So as soon as they start to make a 70, then we can take those accommodations off. But I think that you have to argue for that. I'm just going to be honest.
I'm sorry, Laura, I just got to say, I think we got to get them a little above a 70 before we take them away, because then you're going to fall below that 70. And that 70, as you said, is just really critical for getting them to pass. I'm sorry, that's the only thing I
love that.
I disagree with.
I mean, I would
wait a little bit. Once
everybody to feel like that. I agree. But to keep it like, so everybody feels comfortable, I would say the 70 is our goal.
So when I was in the classroom in Massachusetts, we could provide graphic organizers that had no words in them. Is that the case in Georgia as well? Like we could even provide those on state tests as long as they didn't have any words. So we could give them an empty Frayer model. We could give them, word, Webbs and all kinds of stuff, as long as they had no words in them. And the benefit to that was that if we use them in instruction, and students got used to using those as scaffolds, and they could, use that during the major testing as well. I don't know if that's the same in Georgia or not.
That's a brilliant idea and a great suggestion to make, because I don't think it is allowed. Currently, some of us have already are trying to convey to the Georgia DOE that to ask a question about why, for example, Georgia doesn't allow scratch paper on the speaking portion of the access when other states, do. So there's a lot of conversation around what's appropriate and what's not. And, honestly, if folks could just simply realize one key point, and that is that if you don't do something to scaffold during testing, during instruction and during testing, to make the content more comprehensible and make it possible for kids to engage and show what they know, then you're testing language and not content knowledge or performance. And that's called construct contamination. And that completely undermines the ability to interpret the results of the test with any
Right.
validity. And
Right.
that's the thing that people need to realize, is that if you want the test to actually matter and be useful, you have to do something that's meaningful for the kids. And you stop talking about fairness and start talking about meaningful data.
Agreed. And that's how we have to present our case. And I think it's difficult when you're a new teacher, but I think the more that you build the relationships with the teachers in your building, with your admin, and just the county in general, I think that when you're advocating for just testing the content and not the language, we'll test the language at a later date, but like just assessing the content, I think that's the argument that you have to make with those accommodations.
Well, and I think one other thing we can ask ourselves is, can we do a mix that has more performance-based assessment in it? And yes, still introduce them to and make sure that they frequently encounter the kind of items they'll get on the state test, but they don't have to sit through endless repetitive, sets of, mock state tests in order for us to be comfortable that they understand the content. We need to make sure they can translate what they can do on a performance assessment over to a multiple choice test, because we know that is in their future and that is going to come. But it's really only in those end of course tests that they have that experience. In other content tests, we are free to assess them according to what school districts allow. School districts have their own policies, are free to assess in multiple means and to really try to get at what they really know and can do.
Yeah, agreed. That's what I do with my US history. I'm gonna be honest. I have been, just using, I will do like a bunch of multiple choice tests, like right at the end. And that's right after spring break. But during the school year, I'm assessing them with essays and performance-based projects, anything with speaking, anything that's language-based. But then all that multiple choice EOC, the EOC is only 40 questions. Like, why am I spending 9 months on multiple choice tests when I really need their language to grow? And I also just feel like they understand it better when they're writing and speaking.
Yeah. Well, and we have to cut off here. We're actually a little bit over time, but thank you so much, Laura Grace, for starting this conversation. It looks like we need to continue it because there's so much to unpack when it comes to sheltered content. So thank you so much. Everyone, this QR code takes you to our feedback form. I will also email it out to you. So if you don't get it right now, don't worry about it. But I just want to invite you to our next session, which will be led by some of our colleagues out of Cobb County, and talking about how to take the CCRPI data and use that to plan forward for our multilingual learners. So we hope you can join us in 2 weeks on the 26th. And thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth, for getting us started.
Hey, we're a team. We are a team.
We are.
How many times have I called you or Priscilla saying, I'm stuck in traffic?
So thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We are at your disposal. Have a great night.
Have a great night, evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Terrell. Thank you so much, Laura Grace. You did an amazing job.
Yeah. Awesome.